Hello, my name is Carson Mann. I'll be discussing France's disaster management. One of the first forms of a disaster in France is the plague of Provence, which killed nearly 126,000 people in southern France. At this time, they were trying to centralize the power, so they appointed a general over the Civil Protections Agency, which ultimately led to the success of eradicating the plague in France. Shortly thereafter, the Enlightenment era took place, which prioritized the French citizens' um, um, fundamental right of protection to natural disasters, which is actually inputted into the French Constitution. This led to the justification of France entering into the Cold War, World War One, and World War Two. Also around this time, um, emergency management of France started to focus more on disasters outside of the natural disaster realm, which we'll discuss in further slides. France implements a bottom-up approach. So at the local level, mayors primarily deal with the daily safety events. However, prefects deal with the emergency management side of things. And if they are incapable of handling an event, it'll go to the regional level where there are 7 department zones scattered throughout France. And they also deal with the ORSEC plan, which is the Civil Protections Organizational Plan, which essentially um, they work in tandem with the local prefects in order to create that smooth, coordinated approach in handling a little bit bigger of disasters. If they're incapable of handling the event, it'll go to the national level, which is primarily dealt by the Department of Defense and Civil Safety, which falls underneath the Ministry of Interior. Also, there's these interministerial crisis cells, otherwise known as CICs, which gathers a bunch of information, centralizes it, and the national government uses that to help assist the regional and local levels. Looking at some types of disasters, um, from the years 2001 to 2022, nearly 2,000 damaging natural disasters killed just under 31,000 people. Heat waves, forest fires, and droughts are fairly common during the summer months. However, coastal flooding is the main concern of France. Looking at those other emerging threats I was discussing earlier, one of those is mainly terrorist attacks. A couple examples there on the screen, but the Central Intelligence efforts of France have prevented nearly 40 attacks since 2017. France isn't alone in these efforts. From 2007 to 2023, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations increased by 200%. Some of these contributors are the Expertise France, which is France's primarily international organization, um, disaster relief efforts, and also the Civil Protection Military, which is seen here on the screen, which deals with the response phase primarily. And the French Red Cross is one of those notable NGOs that helps in the efforts as well. Some obstacles. There are many competing agencies, such as the health, educational, and a whole bunch of other agencies that implement their own disaster plan, which often contradicts or overlaps other agencies' plans, which kind of creates that mishap and backlog of being able to carry out these efforts. And France as a whole just has a complex disaster management system, which can exacerbate those issues. In the 2003 heat wave, the alert system failures um, were a um, a huge reason for the widespread deaths and injuries caused in France when the governments, hospitals, and other organizations were unable to take the disaster seriously. Um, Coincided with these alert system failures um, is a potential is a historical failure of France's emergency management, but could also be a potential obstacle in the future if this sort of lack of communication across realms continues. Looking a little bit at some case studies, the 2010 Xynthia storm highlighted the failures of the flood defenses of France. However, the GEM API tax was implemented shortly thereafter, which taxed local residents to fund a better flood defense system, which ultimately was pretty successful after the storm. And in 2003 heat wave, there was a overall failure from all three levels of government, which I was discussing earlier. However, they did implement the heat action plans and temperature reducing features to further prevent that from occurring in the future. Here are my references.